Welcome, little dreamer. The night is calm, the wind is listening. Settle in now, and drift into the story of Elia, a quiet girl who painted the sky with whispers. There was once a quiet village cradled between violet hills and murmuring meadows, where the wind never stopped its gentle wandering. It whispered through hedges and hollow trees, weaving secrets into the branches, and sang lullabies through the slats of shutters as people drifted off to sleep. On the highest of those hills, where the sky seemed closest and the clouds moved like thoughts drifting through dreams, lived a girl named Elia. Elia was quiet too. Her voice was soft, and her thoughts even softer. She lived with her grandmother in a round, weather-worn cottage with ivy on the walls and blue-painted shutters that clicked when the wind passed by. The hill had been her home since before memory, and she knew every bend in its path, every patch of moss, every place where the daisies grew a little taller. But Elia had a secret, one she scarcely understood. On her 7th birthday, her grandmother had gifted her a strange little brush made from the feathers of sparrows and a box of old, glass ink pots. The ink shimmered oddly, like moonlight trapped in water. "Your grandfather painted the sky with these," her grandmother had said with a smile that held more memory than words. Elia laughed, thinking it a story, until one day, sitting with her sketchbook beneath the sighing willow near the hill's crest, she painted a spiral of pale blue with the feather brush. As her brush lifted from the page, a gust of wind rose suddenly, circling her once before racing down the slope toward the village. Her heart leapt, and her breath caught like a leaf in motion. She drew another curve, and again the wind obeyed, playful and light. From that day on, she began to paint the wind, not in pictures, but in patterns that became real. A breeze for the washing line. A swirl for the children flying paper birds. A hush to settle restless trees. The wind listened to her, and she listened to it, their quiet friendship blooming like evening flowers. And yet, in recent days, something had begun to change. Her drawings shifted after she made them. A gust would rise where none was painted. Lines she didn't remember sketching appeared, subtle and strange. The wind still came, but no longer solely at her call. That night, the wind was restless, not wild, but thoughtful, like a stream murmuring over stones it had once known well. Elia sat near her small attic window, knees tucked beneath her chin, brush in hand though she hadn't drawn since noon. The ink pots were still, but the silver one glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat just below the surface. She opened her sketchbook and turned to the last page she had painted. There, where a spiral of wind had once whirled gently, the pattern had shifted overnight. It now unraveled into something unfamiliar, still elegant, but no longer hers. And in the lower margin, a faint shape had appeared, a feather, long and curling, drawn with a precision that didn't belong to her hand. Elia's breath was slow. The wind, she realized, had begun to draw back. The next morning, the sky wore a pale lilac shawl. Mist wandered through the village like it had forgotten where to go. Elia rose before her grandmother, packed her brushes and inks, and walked the winding path to the top of the hill. There, the willow tree rustled softly, and the grasses bent in a directionless breeze. She dipped her brush in the golden ink and painted a soft loop across her page. Nothing stirred. Another line, a coaxing curl. Still, the air remained still, watchful, as if waiting. She closed her eyes and tried to feel what the wind was thinking. Her fingers tingled. There, on the edge of the silence, was a pull, not from the sky, but from her page. She opened her eyes, and the lines she had drawn had already shifted. They twisted into a new form, elegant and fluid, and the breeze responded to that shape, not hers. It wasn't disobedience. It was something else. Alia's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but wonder. Had she awakened something? Or had something awakened her? From behind the willow, a petal spiraled upward, not from flower or breeze, but from a place she couldn't name. The wind was no longer just her companion. It was becoming her teacher. The days that followed unfolded like whispered questions. Elia still climbed to the hill each morning, sketchbook in hand, but her role had shifted. She was no longer solely a painter of winds. She had become something between observer and participant, listening more than leading, watching as the sketches transformed before her eyes. Her brush would touch the page, yet the lines would shimmer and sway, bending into new forms, unfamiliar but not unkind. One afternoon, as soft clouds lounged overhead and swallows darted through the air like flitting notes in a song, Alia's fingers moved without quite knowing what they meant to do. The brush dipped into the lilac ink, her favorite, and danced across the page, not in spirals or gusts, but in fine, winding threads. When the page was full, she stared at what had emerged. It was a map, delicate and abstract, drawn entirely in loops and strokes of wind shape. She didn't recognize the places, but she felt them. A curl that hummed of heather and stone. A spiral that whispered of water meeting rock. A long, gentle arc that carried the scent of wild thyme and the hush of deep silence. The breeze around her stirred, then steadied. It moved in quiet pulses, flowing over her shoulders, brushing her cheeks as if inviting her to follow. The map, she now understood, was not meant for her eyes alone, it was the wind's memory, drawn through her hand. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was showing her where it had come from, or where it was going. Elia closed her eyes and let the air settle into her breath. She listened to the soft hum of invisible things, the way the light danced behind her lids. The wind had always obeyed before. Now it asked. She folded the page and tucked it close to her chest. The path ahead was not on stone or soil, it flowed in currents through the world, marked not by direction, but by feeling. A journey made not by feet, but by following something ancient and unseen. That night, the stars shimmered more brightly than she could ever remember. And in her dreams, she floated above meadows shaped like the sketches in her book, carried by a wind that knew her name. Elia rose with the first hush of dawn, when the world was still wrapped in mist and the birds had not yet begun their morning songs. She dressed slowly, as though each motion belonged to a softer rhythm now, and tucked the folded wind map inside the sleeve of her cardigan. Today, she would follow it, not to a place on any village road, but to the next point the breeze wished her to see. She stepped into the early light, which hung in the air like breath in winter, and made her way past the willow and down the other side of the hill, a slope she rarely explored. The grasses grew taller here, swaying in harmony with the invisible hands that stirred them. As she walked, her feet moved not by decision, but by instinct, guided by the quiet pulse of the wind. After some time, she reached a hollow, a small dip in the land, cradled by birch trees with white bark and long, listening limbs. It was a place the wind seemed to favor, for it circled gently within, never sharp, never still. A breeze greeted her like an old friend, brushing strands of hair from her forehead and tugging at the edge of her sleeve where the map was hidden. Elia sat on a flat stone at the center of the hollow. She unrolled the map once more. This time, the lines shimmered with motion, subtle as breath on glass. One curve glowed faintly, and when she touched it, the air around her stirred. A whisper came, not a word, not a voice, but something that touched the part of her that understood without explanation. A feeling of distance, not in miles, but in meaning. A sense that something long separated was waiting to be found. She looked around the hollow. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet, she noticed small things. The way the grasses bent not with the wind, but toward it. The tiny spiral shapes made by fallen petals. The air itself held memory, like an echo of something once sung and never quite forgotten. Elia reached for her brush again. This time, she didn't paint a breeze or a gust. She let the feather drift across the page, and where it touched, the wind replied with emotion so subtle it could have been a sigh. In this hollow, it seemed, the wind remembered things. And perhaps, it wished for her to remember too. That evening, as the sun began to slide behind the hills and turn the clouds the color of pressed petals, Elia returned home with a heart full of hush. Her grandmother had left a bowl of stew warming near the hearth, and a small bundle of herbs hung by the window to dry. Everything in the cottage was still, yet in Elia's chest, the wind fluttered like a page not yet turned. After supper, she opened her sketchbook once more. Her hand trembled slightly as she dipped the brush into the dust-colored ink, a mix of blue and rose she had blended herself. She began to draw the hollow, its curves and birch trees forming with gentle strokes. As she painted, something unusual happened. The image deepened in color, then brightened, as if lit from within. She leaned closer. There, in the center of the drawn hollow, appeared something she hadn't painted, a small object glowing faintly, shaped like a lantern, but made not of glass or brass. It was carved from stone, yet delicate, soft and pale like the underside of a feather. The lines of it shimmered, pulsing once, then stilled. Elia blinked. The drawing faded to normal ink, but the image of the lantern remained in her thoughts like a name she'd heard in a dream. The wind at the window stirred, and the scent of lavender and birch swept through the room. She felt it again, an invitation. The next morning, she returned to the hollow. And there it was. Nestled among the moss near the flat stone where she had sat, the featherstone lantern, exactly as it had appeared in the drawing. Elia reached out and touched it. The surface was smooth and cool, humming faintly beneath her fingertips. As she lifted it, the air shifted, curling around her shoulders like a shawl. The lantern gave off no flame, yet it glowed from within, just enough to cast gentle light in the shade of trees. Holding it, Elia felt something old awaken. This was not simply a gift. It was a key. With the lantern cradled gently in her hands, Elia stood in the hollow as the morning light filtered through the birch leaves. The glow from the featherstone was soft, no brighter than the blush of dawn itself, yet somehow it painted the air with warmth. The breeze danced closer now, circling her like a ribbon tied by unseen hands. When she stepped forward, the wind moved with her. There was no path, and yet she walked as though following invisible threads. Through the trees, beyond the familiar bounds of the hill, deeper into the lands that lived between wild and forgotten. The forest thinned and thickened again, each turn a soft rearranging of the world, as if she were walking through the folds of a dream. As she moved, she began to feel it, the way the wind remembered. Not through words, not through time, but through places, scents, and echoes. In one clearing, she smelled rosemary and smoke, memories of fireside stories. In another, she heard the faint laughter of voices long past, rustling like dry leaves caught in an eddy. The wind, she understood now, did not forget anything. It simply carried it all, forever turning, forever gentle. The featherstone lantern pulsed with each step. Not in alarm, but in guidance. It seemed to glow brighter near certain stones, quieter near certain streams. It was leading her, though not towards something new, but towards something once lost, perhaps even within herself. Eventually, she came upon a low hill with a ring of old stones, worn by time, laced with moss. The lantern warmed in her hand. She sat at the center, placed the glowing stone on the ground, and let her brush glide once more. This time, she painted not wind, but memory. Her own, of a lullaby her grandmother used to hum, of a winter morning when the wind had carried the scent of cinnamon from the kitchen, of a time when her grandfather had spoken of skies that could be painted with breath. As the ink soaked into the page, the wind around her hushed. It did not blow or spin or lift. It listened. For the first time, Elia did not shape the wind. She shared something with it. And in return, it shared something back. It was near the edge of the map, on a trail of wind Elia had never followed before, that the trees opened suddenly, as if stepping aside. The sun had slipped behind a veil of cloud, and the world wore the soft, gray hush of early evening. The lantern glowed faintly in her hands, and the breeze was no longer playful or curious, but quiet, reverent. There, nestled within a hollow of stone and thistle, stood a small house. It was made of pale wood and woven reeds, weathered smooth by time. Its roof was thick with moss and trailing ivy, and tiny bells hung from the eaves, singing the slightest tunes with every breath of air. But the strangest thing about the house was this: it had no doors. No windows. No way to enter or peer inside. It stood like a secret, wrapped in silence. Elia circled it once. Then again. The wind followed her, low and slow, as though honoring some forgotten rule. She sat down before the house and set the lantern gently upon a stone. The glow of it pulsed just once. She opened her sketchbook. Her brush dipped into the pale blue ink, the one that shimmered like a dawn sky, and without thinking, her hand began to move. The strokes were simple, circular, repetitive, as though she were copying a rhythm not her own. She drew the house. Then the thistles. Then the bells. And finally, a single line where no line had been before, a doorway, arched and slender. The lantern brightened. A sound, so soft it was nearly imagined, rose into the air. A gentle creak. A shift of wood. The bells stirred. The wind inhaled. And slowly, like a memory returning, a door appeared where there had been none. Not with noise or fanfare, but with quiet certainty. The wind had not brought her here to pass through easily. It had brought her here to ask. To remember how to be gentle. And to be invited in. Elia stood at the threshold of the house with no doors, which now held one, painted the color of clouds at dawn, with a small, brass handle shaped like a curled fern. She reached for it not with haste, but reverence, her fingers brushing against the cool metal as though greeting something alive. The door opened without sound. Inside was a space that seemed both smaller and larger than the house itself. The walls were smooth, lined with shelves of unmarked books and glass jars filled with rain, with fog, with what might have been starlight. There were no candles, and yet the room glowed, dim and dreamlike. And in the center sat an old, round table carved from a single piece of driftwood, its surface swirled with pale lines like wind frozen in time. Elia stepped inside. The air was still, but not stagnant. It was the kind of stillness that held listening within it, like the pause between verses of a lullaby. There was a chair for her. She knew it before she saw it. She sat, and placed her sketchbook upon the table. The lantern, too, she set beside it. It pulsed gently, then dimmed, as though it had arrived exactly where it was meant to be. She waited. Nothing moved. The silence deepened, not into emptiness, but presence. And in that space, Elia began to understand. This house was a resting place, not just for wanderers like her, but for the wind itself. A place it returned to when the world had grown too loud. A sanctuary of breath, of memory, of pause. She turned the pages of her book, slowly. The sketches flickered faintly, as if warmed by invisible hands. One page lifted slightly. The same map she had drawn before, only now the lines had shifted again. A path glowed from the center, and it did not lead forward. It led inward. She closed her eyes and listened. Not to the room. Not to the wind. But to the hush within herself. In the room of the house with no doors, time did not pass in the way the village clocks measured. There were no ticking hands, no shifting sunbeams. Only the soft, steady pulse of quiet, and the faint glow from the featherstone lantern resting beside Elia's sketchbook. Her eyes wandered across the tabletop, tracing the soft swirls carved into its surface. At first they had seemed like simple grain, the natural whirls of driftwood. But now they felt deliberate. Shapes began to emerge. A spiral echoing the wind that danced through meadows. A curve that mirrored the hollow. A gentle arc that looked very much like the line of the hill she'd always climbed. Her fingers followed the pattern slowly, reverently, and came to rest at a circle etched into the very center of the table. It was a hatch. With no hesitation, but with complete calm, Elia pressed gently upon it. A soft click, like the turning of a forgotten key. The circle lifted, revealing a small, rounded compartment. Inside lay a roll of parchment tied with sky blue thread, and beneath it, a single feather, not painted, but real, and unlike any she had ever seen. Its strands shimmered like dewlit mist, and it was warm to the touch. She unrolled the parchment. It was a letter, written in a flowing, wind-borne script. Though no name signed the bottom, she understood its voice. It spoke not in commands, but in an invitation, an offering of memory. Of stories never spoken aloud, carried by wind for generations, waiting for one who could read without reading, who could draw without seeing. When you are ready, it read, draw the place where the wind first spoke your name. Elia held the feather in her hand. It was lighter than air, yet full of presence. Her heart stirred, not in urgency, but in gentle recognition. The wind was no longer something she guided. It had become something she trusted. Elia returned to the chair and opened her sketchbook once more. The wind feather, if that was what it truly was, rested gently against her palm. As she dipped it into the silver ink, a faint shimmer spread across the surface, like moonlight scattering on water. She did not think. She did not plan. She simply let her hand move. The feather glide was unlike anything she had known. Each stroke revealed itself like the lifting of fog from a familiar field. First a slope, curved gently, with tall grasses bending toward the west. Then a willow, leaning just so, its branches trailing like long thoughts into the air. A small stone path emerged, spiraling up the side of a hill. And at the center, a cottage with sky-blue shutters, a mossy roof, and smoke rising in lazy curls from a crooked chimney. It was the hill. Her hill. The place she had always known. But never before had she drawn it as it truly was, not with detail, but with feeling. This was not a picture. It was a memory. And more than that, a recognition. As the final line curved into place, a wind rose gently through the house. The bells outside stirred, chiming a soft agreement. The lantern pulsed once, twice, then faded into stillness. The map in her book glowed briefly, then quieted. And in that moment, Elia understood. This was not the place the wind had found her. It was the place where she had first heard the wind. The first time it had truly spoken. Not in gusts or breezes, but in the spaces between. In the hush of sunrise. In the rustle of trees when no one else was listening. In her own heartbeat when she held her brush for the very first time. She had not discovered the wind's voice. She had remembered it. A part of her had always known how to listen, just as the wind had always known how to speak. It had waited for her to slow. To be still enough. To breathe deeply enough. To draw not what she saw, but who she was. She closed the book. The feather rested on the page, its strands curling slightly in the quiet air. And outside, the wind carried a single, tender sound, something between a name and a lullaby. It was her name, spoken in the shape only the wind could make. Elia stepped once more into the air beyond the doorless house, the lantern no longer glowing, the feather tucked gently inside her sketchbook. The trees around her rustled as if offering a farewell, but the breeze that met her cheeks did not guide her forward. It simply accompanied her. She did not follow the map now. The path before her was not drawn in ink or carved in soil. It existed in the rhythm of her breath, in the curve of each step, in the soft knowing that comes only from deep quiet. As she walked, the world unfolded in small, graceful ways. A fox paused to watch her, amber eyes unafraid. A flock of finches wheeled above, their wings catching slants of golden light. The grasses along her path bent gently as she passed, not bowing, but greeting. She walked without haste, carried not by urgency, but by a peaceful kind of purpose. When the hill finally rose again before her, familiar and round, her heart stirred, not with surprise, but recognition. The willow at the top swayed in slow rhythm, as though it had been waiting through all her days and dreams. And there, beside its curved trunk, sat her grandmother. The old woman looked up, her eyes crinkling at the corners, not in astonishment, but welcome. "You walked the wind," she said, her voice soft as ever. "And you listened." Elia smiled and sat beside her. The wind stirred gently, weaving between them, carrying no words, only warmth. Together they watched the sky stretch open above the village, clouds passing like old memories. Elia felt no need to speak of the house with no doors, or the lantern, or the letter. Her grandmother already knew. For some stories are not told aloud. They are lived, and heard, in the space between brushstrokes and breeze. That night, as the stars quietly took their places and the moon unfolded her silver shawl across the fields, Elia returned to her room beneath the slanted eaves of the cottage. The feather rested on the windowsill now, catching starlight in its strands. Her sketchbook lay open beside it, the final page still blank. The wind outside had softened into a hush, as if pausing to watch. She took her feather brush in hand one last time. But this drawing was not for change, nor for guidance. It was not to call the wind, or to map its ancient journey. It was simply to remember. She dipped the brush into the ink that shimmered like dreams left on morning's edge and began to draw. She drew the hill, yes, but not only that. She drew the cottage with its chimney smoke, the willow tree swaying in slow time, the bells that sang in the house with no doors. She drew the hollow, the lantern, the map. The rooms where the wind had been quiet. The sky where it had flown free. And then, at the center of it all, she drew a small figure. A girl, seated in the grass, her head tilted gently to the wind. Her eyes were closed, but she was not sleeping. She was listening. When the drawing was done, she folded her hands in her lap and closed the book. The air in the room was still. Not heavy. Not empty. Just, at rest. Outside, the trees whispered a final lullaby, one only those who have known the wind's truest voice might hear. A song of breath, of return, of things that never truly leave but only change their shape. Elia lay down beneath her quilt of stars, her breath in rhythm with the breeze through the open window. The ink pots shimmered once, then dimmed, and the feather beside them curled gently in sleep. And the wind, content and quiet, curled beside her like a page turned slowly, at the end of a story. In a town where the sea remembers, a man once followed moonlight across the tide. This is the story of a boat made of silence, and the dreams it brings back home. There was a little town at the edge of the sea, cradled in the gentle arms of cliffs and mist, where the tide whispered secrets as it came and went. Its name was Bellmare, though no map marked it clearly, and only those who wandered without destination ever truly found it. Bellmare was a quiet place. The rooftops wore soft moss-like caps, and seagulls floated rather than cried. The streets curved like seashell spirals, lined with lanterns that glowed blue at dusk, their lights bobbing faintly with the wind. No one rushed. The air carried salt and slow thoughts. And each night, the moon cast a golden ribbon across the water, stretching from the far horizon to the oldest pier, as if inviting someone to walk upon it. In this town lived a man named Lorien, who had once been a traveler, though he no longer remembered all the places he had seen. His hair was the color of driftwood, and his eyes, soft gray, like morning fog before the sun arrives. He lived alone in a cottage shaped like a seashell, with wind chimes at every window and a small boat moored quietly in the cove below. Every evening, Lorien would sit on the edge of the pier, watching the water darken into velvet. He carried a small notebook, though he rarely wrote. Instead, he listened, to the sigh of the sea, to the occasional creak of wood, and to something else. Something he could not name. Bellmare had its stories, told in slow voices by candlelight. One was older than the rest, a tale of a silver boat that came only at night, drifting across the water without oars, its lanterns lit by moonlight alone. Some said it carried forgotten dreams. Others, that it led the way to places not found on any map. But most simply called it the moonboat. Few had ever seen it. Fewer still believed. But Lorien. He had once heard it call his name. The night the moonboat returned to Bellmare was a quiet one, wrapped in a breeze soft as a lullaby. Lorien sat upon his usual spot at the pier's end, the wood warm beneath him from the last of the day's sun. The sea was calm, not flat, but breathing, a slow rhythm of rise and fall that seemed older than memory itself. The moon, full and golden, lifted over the horizon like a gentle promise. Its light spilled across the bay in a long ribbon, and for a moment, Lorien thought he saw something shimmer along its path. A flicker. Then two lanterns. Not from the docks. Not from any boat he knew. These lights floated gently across the surface, bobbing in perfect silence. No sails. No mast. Only a low, curved vessel carved from something that looked not quite like wood, nor metal, nor stone. It shimmered with the texture of moonlight, as if woven from beams and dusk. The moonboat. It moved slowly, deliberately, following the path of the moon's light as though it were a current all its own. The lanterns that hung from its side glowed in colors that changed with every wave, first silver, then lavender, then a hue like the space between dreams. It made no sound. Lorien did not move. The notebook rested forgotten at his side. As the boat drifted closer to the pier, the breeze shifted. It carried with it scents that did not belong to Bellmare: cedar groves, mountain snow, the sweetness of a place remembered only in childhood. And faintly, beneath those notes, a sound, not music exactly, but a hum, low and familiar, as if someone were calling from far, far away. Then, without ripple or splash, the boat came to rest beside the pier. No one rowed. No one called. But one of the lanterns, small and round as a plum, lifted from its hook and drifted gently toward Lorien. It hovered before him, glowing faintly, waiting, not with urgency, but with invitation. Lorien's hand trembled as he reached forward. And as his fingers touched the lantern, the wind sighed softly, as if the sea remembered him. When Lorien's hand met the lantern, it pulsed once, soft and warm, like the beat of a small heart. The moment stretched long and quiet. The world around him hushed. Even the waves seemed to hold their breath. Then, without sound or sway, the lantern drifted toward the boat, and Lorien rose to follow. He stepped carefully, more from reverence than fear, onto the boat's curved deck. It was smoother than wood, cool beneath his feet and gently luminous, as if it held light from moons past. As soon as he was aboard, the boat gave a single slow sway and began to glide. No ropes were cast off. No sails unfurled. Yet the vessel moved forward, steady and sure, following the moon's ribbon across the water. The village slipped away behind him, softened by distance and mist. The bells in Bellmare rang twice, low and far, then faded. Lorien stood at the bow, his heart still and expectant, like someone standing in the pause before a memory returns. The sea shimmered around the moonboat in hues that shifted with its passage, sometimes pearl, sometimes pale blue, sometimes the color of lavender tea. Beneath the surface, he glimpsed strange shadows. Not fish. Not kelp. But shapes that seemed to swim through thought, flickering in and out of sight. One looked like a child's forgotten kite. Another, like a doorway. As the boat moved farther from shore, the air grew cooler, but never cold. The wind brushed his shoulders like a shawl worn long ago. And the hum returned. It was clearer now, neither melody nor speech, but a sound that made his chest ache with something both gentle and vast. It was the sound of an echo remembered. The sea, it seemed, carried more than water. It carried memory. And it had not forgotten him. The further the moonboat drifted from Bellmare's shores, the deeper the world became, though not in darkness, but in silence. A hush settled around Lorien, not heavy, but complete, like the pause between one breath and the next. Above him, the stars had begun to shimmer. But as he gazed down at the sea below, he saw their reflections stretching endlessly beneath the waves. Yet these stars moved differently. They pulsed and drifted as though alive. The sky below the water was not a mirror, it was another sky entirely. Lorien leaned over the side of the boat, drawn to the strange shimmer. One by one, images began to bloom beneath the surface, soft, glowing impressions that rose and faded like dreams stirred by sleep. He saw a child, laughing, chasing ribbons through a golden field. Himself, perhaps, long ago. Then another vision, a woman on a cliffside path, her braid caught by the wind, her eyes turned toward the sea. Her presence stirred something in his chest he had not felt in many years. A name nearly returned, but floated away before it could reach him. The boat glided onward, and the visions changed. A sky with 2 moons. A staircase of clouds. A village of windows floating in mist. None of them belonged to his memory, yet all felt known, as if he had passed by them once, in another story, another dream. The lanterns swayed gently, their colors shifting with each vision. One glowed amber as a great bird soared below the surface. Another turned pale green as a forest unfolded under the waves, its trees swaying in slow, underwater wind. Lorien pressed his palm against the boat's smooth rail. It was warm now, pulsing faintly in time with his heartbeat. The moonboat was more than vessel, it was a bearer of what was lost, and what wished to be remembered. He sat down upon the deck, breath soft, gaze wide. And the stars beneath the waves began to whisper. Not in sound, but in light. Sometime in the still hours of the night, the sea around the moonboat grew smooth as glass, the stars above and below indistinguishable, as if Lorien drifted not on water, but between 2 skies. Then, far ahead, a shape began to form on the horizon, not large, not loud, but certain. An island, rising softly from the sea like a sleeping thought. It was small and round, its shores edged with pale sand that shimmered as if it remembered the moon. A few willow-like trees swayed gently, though no wind could be felt. At the island's center stood a single arch of stone, time-worn and laced with moss, and from its keystone hung a lantern not unlike those on the boat, but older, dimmer, as though it had waited a long while to be lit again. The boat drifted to the sand without so much as a sigh. Lorien stepped ashore, and the sand gave beneath his feet like soft memory. He walked slowly toward the arch, the sea hushed behind him, the night holding its breath. The lantern above him flickered, then flared. And in that moment, the air shimmered. Around the stone arch, scenes began to appear, not like the visions beneath the sea, but more vivid, more real. They hovered in the air like tapestries of mist, a small cottage with sea glass in the windows, a woman humming as she stitched by the fire, a child, himself, curled on the floor, painting shells with salt and ink. Lorien watched, his breath caught in wonder. These were not only memories. They were his. But not as he remembered them. These were untouched by time, preserved by the wind and tide. Held gently, like lanterns waiting to be seen again. The moonboat had brought him here not to forget, but to remember fully. To gather what had been left behind. And to carry it forward, not in sorrow, but in peace. Lorien sat beneath the stone arch for a long while, the lantern's dim glow dancing across his features, catching in his hair like silver threads. The scenes that drifted before him softened, fading gently, not as if disappearing, but as if bowing out with grace. He felt no longing. Only calm. As the last image, a small shell with a spiral painted in sea blue, flickered and vanished, a breeze touched his shoulder. It came from nowhere and everywhere. It was not cold. It carried no salt. But it spoke without words. He turned, and there upon the sand beside him lay a lantern. It had not been there before. Unlike the others, this lantern was made of driftwood and glass, its frame bound with threads of seagrass, and inside, a flame danced in slow spirals, blue, green, and gold. It did not flicker. It moved, like breath. He reached for it, and the moment his fingers brushed its handle, the sea stirred once more. The moonboat waited, now glowing more brightly than before. Lorien walked slowly back to its waiting deck. The lantern in his hand pulsed with quiet strength, and as he stepped aboard, the boat turned without sound and began its return. Not in haste. Not in sorrow. But with the grace of something complete. The stars beneath the sea dimmed. The moon's ribbon shortened. And the boat slipped gently back toward the world he had left. The lanterns swayed in the wind, and their colors echoed his steps. But now, one lantern glowed brighter than all, the one he carried. It was not a beacon. It was a remembrance. And a promise. Bellmare's shoreline returned by degrees, mist first, then rooftops, then the old pier, waiting like a page left marked. The boat glided to a stop, and the tide kissed the wood. Lorien stepped onto the dock. The lantern stayed lit in his hand. Behind him, the moonboat drifted once more into the dark, its lanterns winking out one by one, until it was only a ripple in the starlight. And the sea fell quiet once again. Lorien walked slowly through the sleeping streets of Bellmare, the lantern cradled in his hand casting soft spirals of color on the cobbled stones. The town had not changed, its chimneys leaned as before, the shutters blinked like drowsy eyes, and the gulls still perched upon the rooftops, tucked into their wings. Yet everything felt different. Or perhaps, more awake. The tide still sang in the distance, and the wind moved gently between houses, as though it too had returned from somewhere far. When Lorien reached his seashell-shaped cottage, he paused at the door. The lantern flickered once more, as if bidding him to listen, not just to the sea, but to the stillness inside. He stepped through the familiar frame. The chimes above the door gave a soft tinkle, and the scent of salt and thyme met him like a memory. The lantern floated gently from his hand then, not falling, but rising, hovering quietly above the little table by the window. It settled there, pulsing in rhythm with the hush of the waves. And then, it dimmed. Not as though extinguished, but as though it had found its place. Lorien stood by the window and watched the tide roll out. He thought of the visions beneath the waves, of the woman with the wind-caught braid, of the child painting shells, of the stars beneath the sea. He reached for his old notebook at last. The one long carried, rarely used. He turned to the first blank page. And without hesitation, he began to draw. Not the moonboat, not the island, or even the sea. He drew Bellmare. The way it looked tonight. The way it felt tonight. Soft, quiet, complete. As the days passed, the lantern by Lorien's window never went out. It no longer pulsed with color or shimmered with dreams, but it glowed gently, like a memory that chooses to stay close. On rainy evenings, it painted soft golden arcs across the floor. On fog-dim mornings, it reached through the mist like a hand. And the people of Bellmare began to notice. They would pass his cottage and pause, just for a moment, to glance at the window. The light never flickered, never changed. But those who saw it felt a warmth settle in their chest, like the quiet hum of something remembered. Some said the lantern had come from the stars. Others believed it was a gift from the tide. But those who knew Lorien, who remembered him sitting quietly at the pier, day after day, said little. They simply smiled. On certain nights, when the sea was calm and the sky clear, some swore they could still see the moonboat far across the water, drifting along the edge of moonlight. But they never waved it down. They never tried to follow. Because somehow, they understood. The moonboat didn't come to carry people away. It came to give something back. One evening, a child asked Lorien what the lantern was for. He simply looked at the window and said, "It's for those who can't sleep." And that was all. So the lantern glowed on, through seasons, through storms, through stars rising and falling again. It became a part of Bellmare's hush. A part of its dreaming. And if someone, now and then, felt lost, they would walk the slow curve of the cobbled street, look up at the window, and remember something gentle. In the months that followed, Lorien's life unfolded like a quiet tide. Not with drama or revelation, but with small, gentle shifts. He began walking again, not far, just to the edge of the harbor, or along the path behind the cliffs where sea pinks grew. Sometimes he sat with his sketchbook and let his pencil wander. Other times, he watched the horizon, as if listening for something in the way the sky touched the water. And always, when he returned home, the lantern greeted him, never brighter, never dimmer, as though it too had learned to live in calmness. But one day, as summer leaned gently into autumn, a curious thing happened. A folded slip of paper had been tucked beneath his door. The paper was soft, sea-worn at the edges, and it held a single sentence written in blue ink, in the curl of a hand he did not recognize but somehow knew. "I remember the song you hummed in your sleep." He read it twice, heart still. The next day, another note came. And another the day after. Each one different, each folded with care, each containing a memory, not just his own, but memories that felt shared. A seashell held in two hands. A melody played on a broken flute. A morning fog that hid the whole world for a while. The wind carried them, it seemed. There were no names. No signatures. Only the quiet knowledge that he was not alone in what he remembered. And slowly, Lorien began to reply. He wrote on the backs of old sketches and tucked his responses under stones near the harbor, or beneath the wild rose bush by the hill. He didn't know who read them. He didn't need to. The wind had become a messenger of gentle things. And Bellmare, a town that once only whispered, now softly answered back. The years passed, not as pages, but as petals, falling slowly, without rush or fanfare. Lorien grew older, as all things do, but in the way stones smooth rather than crumble. His hair grew whiter, like sea foam, and his steps slower, but never uncertain. He still walked the shore, still watched the tide, and still sat beside the lantern, now resting like a heartbeat in the dark. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the sea stretched quiet and wide, the children of Bellmare would gather near his gate, lanterns of their own flickering in their hands. "Tell us the story," they'd ask in soft voices. And he would. Not always the same way, not always from the beginning. Sometimes he spoke of the boat made from starlight and silence. Sometimes of the island where memories bloomed like lanterns. And sometimes, more often as the years passed, he simply spoke of the light in the window. "It's there to help you remember," he'd say, "and to help you sleep." And so the story lived, not as one tale, but as many. Passed like sea glass from hand to hand, polished smooth by wonder and time. One night, when the tide was low and the moon hung heavy over the bay, Lorien did not come to the pier. Nor to the shore. Nor to the path behind the cliffs. But the lantern in his window still glowed. And the next morning, a child swore she saw a silver boat drifting far out at sea, its lanterns trailing behind it like falling stars. Bellmare did not grieve. It remembered. And each night, the lantern remained lit, soft and steady, a light for wanderers, a guide for dreamers. For the moonboat still sails. Whenever the wind is kind. And the sea is quiet. And someone, somewhere, wishes to be found. When the town sleeps, a quiet cat paints the night with starlit colors. But one evening, a dream appears she didn't make, and a new kind of story begins. In the heart of a quiet town where the roofs leaned close like old friends and the streets curled like ribbon through cobblestone lanes, there lived a cat who painted dreams. She was a small creature, with fur the color of twilight and eyes that glowed like fireflies caught in jars. No one knew where she had come from, only that she had always been there, gliding silently from rooftop to rooftop, her tail swaying like a brushstroke through the night. The townspeople called her Mira, though she never told them her name. Each evening, after the last candle was snuffed out and the shutters drawn, Mira would rise from her perch atop the bell tower and slip through the silver pools of moonlight. She carried no brushes, no paints. Only the tip of her tail shimmered with color, soft pastels, glowing whites, and starlit blues. She painted not with pigment, but with silence. And in the morning, her work could be found scattered across the town, a sleepy crescent moon tucked behind a chimney, a cascade of dreamflowers blooming along a fence, the silhouette of a flying whale curling around a dormer window. No one ever saw her at work, but everyone knew the signs. Children woke with wonder in their eyes. Old stories stirred in the hearts of those who had long since stopped dreaming. And the quietest folk, the bakers, the watchmakers, the gardeners, would pause mid-step, sensing something unspoken written in the corners of the sky. No one knew why she painted. She never lingered for praise. But she returned each night. Not for applause, but for the promise that someone, somewhere, would look up and remember something gentle. And so it was, until the night a new dream appeared, one Mira had not painted. It curled behind a chimney, glowing faintly, in hues unfamiliar. A shape strange and wild, and yet not unkind. Mira paused beneath it, her whiskers still. The dream had not come from her. And the wind carried a whisper. "Come find me." Mira stared at the strange shape painted on the chimney, its edges curling like sea foam, its center pulsing gently with a soft glow. It shimmered in colors she did not carry, pale greens that swirled like meadow winds, golds that flickered like laughter, and a thread of deep violet that vibrated just beneath sight. It was beautiful, but it was not hers. The cat stepped lightly along the rooftop's ridge, her paws making no sound. She reached the dream and brushed it gently with the tip of her tail. A ripple passed through it, like breath across a pond. The dream did not dissolve. It answered. A single word unfurled, not spoken, but felt. Follow. Mira's ears turned toward the wind. It was changing, shifting with a rhythm she had never known. Her tail glowed faintly, though she had not painted. Something ancient stirred in the air, like lullabies sung in forgotten languages. She looked down at the cobbled streets. All was still. Lamps flickered softly in their iron frames. Windows blinked with the warmth of sleep. But above, the sky opened wider than before, its stars arranging themselves in unfamiliar constellations, as though clearing a path. The dream on the chimney pulsed once more, then lifted. It drifted upward like a paper lantern caught by a breeze, spinning slowly, then dissolving into the sky. Mira watched until it was gone. Then, without a sound, she leapt down onto the lower rooftops, tail flicking thoughtfully behind her. She walked in spirals, painting nothing, yet leaving behind faint traces of light, like breadcrumbs woven from memory. A trail only those who knew dreams would see. Something was calling. Not in urgency, but invitation. And for the first time in many, many nights, Mira would not be painting. She would be following. The rooftops of the town gave way to the hills beyond, where ivy tangled through chimney bricks and roof tiles shifted like scales on old creatures. Mira moved with grace, not rushed, but steady, her paws never slipping, her shadow cast long and thin in the lilac-colored moonlight. She followed the shimmering trail left by the rising dream, though it had long since vanished. Still, she felt it, a soft tug, like a thread tied to the very tip of her tail. The stars above had shifted into strange shapes, some flickering like wings, others like doorways. And beneath them, nestled at the edge of the dreaming hills, stood a house Mira had never seen before. It looked like it had grown rather than been built. Its walls were curved and soft-edged, like sand dunes kissed by twilight. The roof was covered in moss and pressed flowers. Wind chimes made from glass leaves hung from every corner, and they tinkled in a song Mira had heard once in a long-forgotten dream. But it was the door that caught her eyes. It shimmered faintly, just like the dream on the chimney. And painted across its surface was a shape, no image, no pattern, just a swirl of color so deep, so still, that it pulled her closer. She stepped toward it. The door opened before her paw could touch it. Inside, the air smelled of cedarwood and old ink. Paintings covered the walls, none framed, none signed. They floated in midair, gently moving, as if stirred by distant memories. Dreams, yes, but not her own. They glowed in unfamiliar colors, spoke in unfamiliar rhythms. And in the center of the room, upon a low table, lay a brush. A brush not made from fur or feather, but from light itself. Mira patted softly to its side and looked down. A note rested beneath it, written in curling script. For the one who dreams alone. Let us dream together. Mira sat very still beside the glowing brush, her eyes reflecting its gentle pulse. Though her own tail shimmered with familiar color, this brush radiated something different, older, deeper. It was not made of anything a cat could find on earth. It shimmered like it remembered the beginning of dreams. The note beneath it still fluttered faintly, though there was no breeze. Mira read it again. For the one who dreams alone. Let us dream together. She did not know whose paw or hand had written it. But the words settled into her like a hush after rain. Carefully, she placed a single paw on the brush. The moment she touched it, the room around her slowed. Not with fear or confusion, but a soft widening, like the way a dream bends time without notice. The floating paintings paused mid-shift, the air grew warmer, and light filled the spaces between shadows. Images stirred in her mind, unbidden, a sky made entirely of mirrors, a staircase that sang with every step, a child, eyes closed, sleeping beneath a tree with roots made of ribbon. The brush lifted from the table on its own and hovered before her, a strand of light unraveling from its tip. It floated gently in the air like a firefly tracing thought. It was asking her something. Mira blinked slowly. Then, with her tail, she drew a circle through the air, small and sure. The brush responded, swirling to life, leaving behind a glowing line that shimmered softly and stayed suspended in space. A shape began to form. Not a flower. Not a bird. But something in between, a memory that had never happened, yet felt real. The walls of the house began to glow in rhythm. The paintings around her shifted their colors to match the shape she'd drawn. The brush spun slowly once, twice, then settled into her paw. She had not just been invited to follow. She had been invited to paint again. But this time, she would not be painting alone. The house of floating paintings opened into a garden not through doors, but through breath. As Mira stepped forward, the far wall melted like mist touched by morning sun, revealing a wide open space filled with soft hills and curling vines that glowed faintly from within. The plants were unlike any she'd seen, each one gently swaying, even though no wind stirred. Some leaves shimmered like silk, others chimed like porcelain when brushed. The dreamsmith's garden, the air seemed to say. Though no voice spoke it aloud. The brush floated just above her shoulder now, its light shifting with her thoughts. Myra's tail, too, had begun to change, its usual shimmer deepened, now reflecting colors she had never used before. As if it, too, were learning something new. She stepped along a pathway made of moss and scattered moonlight. As she walked, small paintings bloomed in the air around her. Not from her own tail, nor from the brush, but from the garden itself. Dream memories of someone else. A child walking on starlight. A fox weaving patterns into a blanket of night. A staircase carved from lullabies. Each painting hovered only a moment, then faded like mist, leaving behind a soft sense of peace. The garden was not only a place, it was a dream being dreamed, even now. At its center stood a tall, spiral tree with bark of silver and leaves shaped like feathers. Mira approached slowly. Beneath the tree, a canvas floated in the air, blank and humming. The brush in her paw grew warm. It was time. She lifted it, and for the first time, painted not upon walls, not upon rooftops, but into the open air. Her strokes flowed effortlessly, and the canvas received them like a breath inhaling color. A swirl. A wave. A tiny light at the center. Then, from the trees around her, a soft stir of presence. Someone, or something, was coming. And it, too, was made of dreams. The air shifted. A hush passed through the feather-leaved branches, not of fear, but of recognition, like a long-forgotten melody remembered just before sleep. Mira paused mid-stroke, her brush hovering gently above the glowing canvas, its latest line still fading from bright blue to soft silver. The sound came again. Not footsteps. Not wind. A rhythm, like breath woven into the earth. Then, from between the tall curling vines, a figure appeared. Not a cat. A child. Or something like one. Small, slender, wrapped in a robe the color of twilight, with hair that shimmered like dream dust. Their eyes glowed faintly, soft orbs of color that changed with every blink, starlight pink, lavender mist, deep ocean green. In their hands, they held a brush of their own, long and curved, with a tip of folded light. They smiled at Mira, not in surprise, but as though they had been waiting for her, perhaps all along. The child approached without sound and sat across from her at the base of the spiral tree. They lifted their brush and, without speaking, added a single dot of gold to Mira's painting. The brush responded with warmth. The canvas pulsed. The dream shimmered brighter. Together, they painted. No words were exchanged, and none were needed. Their brushes moved in harmony, sometimes overlapping, sometimes mirroring. Shapes unfolded, moons with winding staircases, books that floated when opened, lanterns that bloomed like flowers. With every shared stroke, Mira felt something unfurl inside her. Not a question. Not a memory. A knowing. This child had painted the dream on the chimney. And more than that, they had been painting nearby for many nights. Softly, quietly. Their dreams had always stayed small, hidden, respectful. Until now. Now, they were ready to be seen. And they had chosen her. The painting grew, not just in size, but in depth. Its shapes unfolded into layers, some glowing brightly, others hiding behind shadows and curves. As Mira and the child painted, the canvas began to hum softly, as though it held a heartbeat of its own. Shapes no longer held only beauty, they held stories. In one corner, a tree grew that bore fruit shaped like clocks, each ticking at a different rhythm. Beneath it, a small figure sat reading a book that turned its pages in both directions. To the left, clouds curled into the shape of boats and drifted toward stars made of tiny doorways. The child smiled as they painted a silver bridge between two floating islands. Mira, watching, understood. A shared dream was not only a creation, it was a bridge. A path between hearts. A tether made not of rope or word, but of wonder. And she, who had painted dreams in solitude for so long, now felt that bridge beneath her paws. They painted until the garden darkened into a deeper shade of blue, and the stars above grew brighter. The brush in Myra's paw slowed, not from weariness, but completion. The canvas was full. Not crowded, just full, like a teacup brimming with warmth. The dream shimmered once, then folded into itself, becoming a soft orb of light that hovered gently in the space between them. The child reached out and cradled it, then held it toward Mira. She touched it with the tip of her tail. And in that moment, a soft gust of wind swept through the garden. The vines danced, the tree shimmered, and petals of light began to fall from nowhere. It was time to return. But not alone. The dream would be carried back with her. And so would the one who helped her paint it. The garden faded like the end of a lullaby, and the spiral tree dimmed into starlight. One by one, the petals of light that had drifted down began to rise again, curling upward into the air, like small lanterns being called home. Mira stepped through the last shimmer of vine and found herself once more atop a familiar rooftop, just beyond the edge of the bell tower. The town lay quiet below, curled in the arms of midnight. The shutters were drawn, the chimneys whispered smoke, and the lanterns glowed faintly along cobbled paths. All was as it had been, yet not quite the same. For beside her now stood the child. Not in the garden's robe, but wrapped in a cloak made of deep indigo, embroidered with tiny constellations. Their brush glowed gently in their hand. A quiet companion, not a visitor. A fellow painter. Mira looked toward the sky. The stars above twinkled more brightly than she remembered, and the moon had shifted ever so slightly, as if tilting in approval. The two of them stood in stillness for a moment, listening to the soft breath of the sleeping world. Then, together, they painted. The child raised their brush and drew a thread of golden dreamlight across the rooftop. Mira followed with a spiral of silver blue that curled around a chimney pot. Together, they wove scenes into the walls, tiny doors opening to garden staircases, cats sleeping on floating books, a swing tied to a cloud. Not every house received a painting that night. Only the ones that needed them. And beneath each painted dream, someone stirred in sleep and smiled, though they would not remember why come morning. The town would wake as it always did, with yawns and tea and soft-footed steps. But the day would carry a peculiar warmth, the kind that made songs sound sweeter and silences feel softer. And above it all, two figures moved through the shadows, painting not just images, but comfort. There was one rooftop neither of them had painted. It sat quietly between the town's two old bell towers, a long slate stretch, flat and wide, like a stage waiting for its curtain. No chimney stood there. No window opened onto it. It was a rooftop that belonged to no one and everyone. Mira led the child there as the moon reached its highest breath. Together, they stood in the quiet, watching the town sleep. Then, without a word, the child lifted their brush and painted a line, slow and curved, like the arc of a falling leaf. Mira followed with a circle, her tail trailing a soft lavender mist. Their strokes met and parted, twisted and crossed, until a shape emerged, a bridge of light arcing across the rooftop, connecting the two towers. As the last line was placed, a sound echoed softly through the stones. The bells began to ring. Not loudly. Not to wake. But gently, tones round and rich, as if they'd waited years for this single moment. The dream they painted hovered above the rooftop like a veil, shimmering with hidden paths and glowing doors. It shimmered with memory, with music, with laughter barely remembered and wonder never lost. Above it, the stars blinked in slow applause. And when the dream was complete, it did not fade as the others had. It remained. A permanent painting, visible only to those who believed in the silence between moments. To those who paused before bed and looked up, just in time to catch something glowing where only darkness should be. Mira and the child curled together beneath it, tails and cloaks folding like petals. The bells chimed once more, then slept. And for the first time in many seasons, Mira felt something she had not known she was missing. Not a new brush. Not a new color. But companionship. As the first hints of dawn reached the edge of the sky, the glow of the painted bridge began to shift, less bright, more transparent. But it did not vanish. It remained like breath on glass, visible only to those who watched with wonder. Mira opened her eyes just as the stars began to blink away. Beside her, the child was still curled, their brush nestled under their cloak, glowing faintly with leftover dream light. Mira studied them with quiet affection. They looked not tired, but rested, the way one does after doing something deeply right. For so long, Mira had painted in silence, in solitude. She had thought that was how it must be, dreams created in quiet, offered like gifts, and left behind without attachment. But now, as the sun stretched pale fingers across the rooftops, she realized. Dreams shared grew roots. Not the kind that held one down, but the kind that connected. The child stirred and sat up. Together, they watched the first bird of morning flutter from a chimney pot, its wings catching the golden light. The bell towers stood silent again, their task complete for now. Below, the town began to wake. A window creaked open. A kettle whistled faintly. Footsteps padded softly over floorboards, and the scent of bread began to drift upward. No one saw the dreamers on the rooftop. No one knew their names. But here and there, someone paused, looked up, and smiled. Mira stretched her back and gave a slow blink. She had always thought of painting as leaving something behind. But now, she wondered. Could painting also be becoming something more? The sun climbed slowly, brushing the edges of buildings with pale gold. Shadows pulled inward. Chimneys exhaled their last curls of night. And the town, freshly touched by dreams, moved forward into the day with a kind of softness it didn't quite understand. Mira and the child stood at the edge of the rooftop between the bell towers, watching. The glow of their shared bridge still shimmered, though fainter now, like memory tucked between pages of a book. It didn't need to be seen to be felt. The child looked to Mira and tilted their head. Then, without speaking, they raised their brush and drew one last shape into the air, a small window, round and glimmering, with a single star in its center. Mira approached and touched the center of the painted window with her tail. And suddenly, she heard them. The dreamers. Not just the child beside her. Not just the townsfolk who stirred below. But everyone who had ever paused to gaze at a cloud and seen a door. Everyone who had ever woken with tears from a dream they couldn't name. Everyone who had ever longed to remember something beautiful they'd never known. She heard them. Soft whispers, laughter, lullabies, unspoken thoughts, all carried on the wind. The dreams she had painted were not only received. They had been remembered. Carried. Loved. Somewhere in the hearts of others, her swirls and spirals had settled. And now, they were echoing back. The child reached for her paw, a gesture both simple and impossibly grand. Together, they stepped into the painting of the window. And gently, without a sound, it opened. The painted window opened not into a room, nor a field, nor even another rooftop. But into a sky made entirely of soft colors and quiet thoughts. A place stitched from dreams left behind, now gathered together like scattered petals. They floated gently, moving without hurry, painted kites, glowing trees, beds of feathers, stairways that curved into music. All suspended in a twilight that never turned fully night, nor ever quite dawn. Mira stepped through, her paws touching nothing solid, yet never falling. The child walked beside her, their cloak trailing small stars. They did not speak, but their thoughts curled between them like ribbons of warmth. Above them, great murals shimmered across the sky, living dreams still being dreamed. Some danced with color, some pulsed with soft sound, and others sat still, like unopened letters. Mira understood then. This was where dreams came after they were painted. Not forgotten. Not erased. Remembered. Kept. Held. A memory palace in the clouds. And among the floating shapes, Mira saw her own work, her earliest rooftop spirals, the first moon she'd ever painted on a window shutter, the floating cat curled in a painted crescent above a baker's sill. Each one glowing, each one whole. She looked to the child. They smiled and painted a new shape into the sky, two figures curled side by side beneath a bell tower's dream. A gift of memory, made together. Mira knew it was time to go. The child placed a hand on her back, light as dust, certain as time, and the painted window slowly opened again. She stepped back into her town, into her rooftop, into her quiet. But she was not the same. Now, when she painted, she left space for others to join. She listened more closely to what the dream said in return. And sometimes, when the stars blinked in a certain rhythm, she would see a faint shimmer beside her, a second brushstroke weaving into hers. They painted together still. For Mira had learned. Dreams do not end when we wake. They wait. And they remember.